I understand.
few years talking to myself my whole life every single day.
Beautiful. That's what
Trying
you.
to
That's
figure
a
this
smart
whole
thing.
thing
Absolutely, that's a smart thing to
because
do.
I was I was expecting this AC to be more active, but it's just me and you.
Yeah, I mean,
Where's everyone else?
we had two other people in here. My two other friends. I basically told one of them wanted to play mini golf with me, and I basically told him that you were going to be done with this interview and you wanted to talk, and so he said he'd be back a little later. And then the other friend just comes in all the time, so he'll be in. Then I have another friend of mine who, when he's in here like 24 hours a day. So I have one friend who like basically lives in here with me, and you're welcome to live in here with me as well. It just varies. I mean, like last night we had as many like a dozen people in here at once, and when it gets that many, it's too difficult for me to have a solid conversation with one single individual. Just people want to chime in or do whatever, or pardon me, random strangers come in. But so I do have the ability to. It's right below this is Rabbi Rothschild's arena. I can go in there. It's a stage, and I can bring up different people to speak. But then there can just be people in the audience, and they don't have the ability to interrupt. So when things get really, really big, we can do that. But in the meantime, I like to have as many conversations as possible within reason, and particularly with people who want to learn. I think it's important. Learning is a lifelong pursuit, and it's important to take it seriously.
Yeah. Oh, shut up. Now, what I've just said is going to I keep forgetting that what I say will be recorded forever.
God willing.
I don't have anything against it. It's just weird concept.
Well, what you may not know is that it's all being recorded anyway, you just don't know it. But there are little packets in your phone
Yeah.
that are being sent to essentially clandestine organizations that are storing all your data anyway. So I knew this happened. This is the Edward Snowden bombshell details, and I basically am lean into it. If I know you're already recording everything that I do, why not let everybody else see it? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not doing anything that is causing any harm against anyone. Anyone who says that I do simply has to just view my life and see that it's all for a positive force of good. And it, I don't run into too many people who are against me after I have a chance to talk to them. In fact, it's really interesting. And one of my favorite things is when people come in here and they say, Rabbi, I don't want war peace. I want war. And I'm able to talk to them and explain to them, like we had in the earlier conversation, that we're not going to be able to get off world and explore so long as we have war here on Earth. So the sooner that we have peace here, the sooner that we're able to explore the other areas of the world or of the universe and to be able to terraform different planets and such. And when they hear that, I have yet to have a person who I feel heartfeltly does not want peace after hearing this.
If I may ask, Rabbi, what time zone are you in?
Pacific?
What time is it for you currently?
And
7:30, so you're like Los Angeles time, yeah?
yep, correct.
Just gonna add that to my clock. But I know you're here. I know when you're gonna be on stream, when you're gonna be awake. I know you're gonna
Perhaps usually it depends really. Like sometimes I'll be up for 2 days straight and then just sleep one long sleep. If people are really, if things are going and it's exciting, sometimes I just don't sleep the whole night and then it becomes the morning and I'm still awake and I'll just continue going or I'll take a little nap or something. But um, generally, if I had to keep hours, um, it varies. I mean, it really varies. I pretend that I'm in a space capsule and I'm just traveling from one planet to another, and thus I live my life like that. Basically, like if I were in a spaceship, it would be just like this. Basically, I mean, I'd have like the sleeping quarters and like all kinds of screens all over the place, and I'd have like communications and like Wi-Fi. But basically, I would be a trailblazer for society if I were traveling through space. and I'm essentially doing that through cyberspace.
That's quite cool. Yeah, you basically are doing that, but yes, wow, that's opened my mind.
One of the things we like to study on this stream, and I go into a lot of depth, are explorers. The people who traveled to the South Pole and the North Pole, and so like people don't know the person who first successfully explored the South Pole, the North Pole, and circumnavigated, or and the Northwest Territories, all the same guy. His name is Roald Amundsen. Basically, but we've studied like the journeys of like Ernest Shackleton and Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary, and to go to the top of Everest, or we've studied the great Spanish explorers of the um, age of exploration, and um,
Yeah,
essentially the the experiences that many of those people have are not all that different than what I've experienced. I experience new people every day. I experience new tribes, essentially new discords. Every server that I go into is like a new tribe, and I have to win them over. And some of them hate me because I'm a foreigner, or they're xenophobic, or they don't know who I am. And I have to explain to them that I'm not here to hurt them, that I come in peace. It's all the same things that colonialists would have done perhaps centuries ago. I'm doing today.
and it's the same thing we're going to have to learn in a sense when we discover a new planet.
100%, exactly. Now that gets into some really exciting technology, and so it's not going to be as difficult. Why? Um, so humans are evolving, and the next step in the fusion between our evolution and our future is cybernetics, which is essentially the fusion of biology and technology. And we're
So
going,
we live forever, so we can, because we are evolution, human life, and that's in, now into immortal, go to cyborgs,
yes,
basically.
exactly. And the argument is made that people are already cyborgs. If you have a pacemaker in your heart, who's to say that you're not already a cyborg? If you
Yeah,
lose access to that piece of technology, you die. So the fact that you are physically dependent on a device sort of already makes you a cyborg. In fact, there's a famous quote allegedly that Dick Cheney wants to be considered the first cyborg because he had so many different pacemakers put in, and he gets them taken out and put back in. That's arguably a cyborg right there.
say you've got a bionic leg, it's motorized and stuff like that. You're part cyborg.
Yes,
There's no human flesh, it's
exactly.
metals. Right.
And so the people who are perhaps amputees or paraplegics or quadriplegics are going to benefit in great
It's the
ways from
first
this.
step. It's cyberology, cyborg. First step.
Exactly, cybernetics. Exactly, and
Sorry, cybernetics.
you're okay. You're okay. These are new phrases, but yeah, and so what we're moving towards very quickly is a world between the haves and the have-nots. Or we're already there, and there's going to be people who are going to be able to afford this, and then there's going to be people who can't, and unfortunately, that we all can't make it. I wish we could, but from what I understand, there's just going to be.
I hope I'm one.
I think you will be too. And Ginger Bong man, you may not understand this, but you're like, and I heard you. You're like, you're an average person. Like when it comes to your economy or your finance, I get that. But you don't recognize that you're in the top 1% of people. And so, how is that? If you're just like an average person, I don't care where you are in the Western world. The way that you talk, I understand. You're not of the the people who don't need to worry about money. And I understand that, but you have to recognize that you are still part of the 1%. How? This is how I explain it. We have, let's say, 8 billion people on Earth. Okay, about half of those people don't have access to clean water, clean food, any kind of sanitation. Okay, so half the world doesn't even have that, let alone electricity. Okay, so then we've got the developed world, which is like working towards 4 billion people, and let's say of those working towards those, maybe half of those people have working electricity all the time, maybe not all the time, just at all. And then half of those people have working electricity all the time. So you're probably one of like 1 billion people on Earth who generally don't have to worry about their power going out just randomly. Now, if you don't pay your power bill, that's different. But you're in the Western world, and generally, if you pay, you're able to keep the lights on. Okay, so that's a bill. So you're already one in a billion of 8 billion. Now from there, we're going to move into the world of connectivity. So of the million people who have electricity, far fewer of those people have a device. Okay, so maybe half of those people who have access to electricity have access to maybe a mobile phone, and it's not even a good mobile phone, but maybe a mobile phone and maybe getting into a smartphone. Okay, but they certainly don't have iPhones. They certainly don't have PCs and MacBooks and all the other stuff. Then you cut that in half even more. So now we're at like maybe 500 million or 250 million people, and then you're getting into, all right, well, you have access to an iPhone and you have access to a computer. Okay, so, but I'm not even talking about getting connected to the internet yet. That's just having access to those. So now you're in like the top, maybe one of perhaps like the top 300 or 500 million people in the world who have access to these things. Now cut that up even slimmer, and you're on the internet. So you just don't have a computer, but you're on the internet. So that's even slimmer, fewer people there. So now we're getting into your like, one of like maybe 500 million active users on the internet regularly, and you use that more. But globally, it's still not everyone. Now, moving on even further, you use social media, which is yet another step in. Some people only use the internet. You use social media. So now you're moving into, well, you started at like the top 100%, then you was the top 50, then 25, then 12.5%, then 6.25%, and we're just going to keep dividing that by two, essentially, until we get to the point where I talk to you about cryptocurrency. You're really one of the few people who have much knowledge on this earth about cryptocurrency globally. Welcome, Sigma Mary. We're glad that you're here. Sigma Misty, we're glad you're here.
So
Yeah,
I am part of the.
yes, and you don't even like realize it, but you are. I am too. If you didn't know it in the world, you only have to make like $30,000 to be part of the 1%.
No way.
Yeah, because the average um
But what we class the 1% as are like the rich, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, guy behind Facebook. What's his
Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah, let's look up the exact statistics on this. Um, so we're going to
That's
chat
money wise.
GPT.
That's what we assume. Then that's money wise.
Globally, if you include a population of 8 billion people, I read a statistic something like a salary of $33,000 annually is the top 1% of earners globally. Can you please provide more information regarding the statistic? Yes, the statistic you're referencing highlights how income distribution varies significantly across the globe. As of recent analyses, to be in the global top 1% of earners, individuals typically need to earn about $32,000 to $33,000 annually. This figure is striking because it contrasts with income levels in wealthier countries, where a much higher income is needed to reach the top 1%. Key points: global income distribution. The vast differences in income between countries mean that a salary that may be considered middle class is a wealthy nation can place someone in the global elite. Purchasing power, when considering purchasing power parity, the value of money varies by country. This means that the same amount of money can afford different living standards depending on the location. But yeah, so you didn't even realize it, but you and probably everybody in this room is part of the top 1%. Isn't that wild?
Thank God for that.
Isn't that
That's
wild?
wild.
Exactly. So, um, Yeah, it's just a really interesting thing that when I told you, like, hey, you're in the top 1% of people, and it's like, no, there's no way. That's Elon Musk, that's Mark Zuckerberg, that's Jeff Bezos. Well, in reality, it's you as well, or pretty close. I mean, if you're not making that right now, somebody in your family's making that or made it to get you a computer and to get you the Wi-Fi and all the other things. So the fact that you're on the like same with the people in here, they're in the top 1%. Why? They have computers, they have access to the internet. They have like social lives on the internet. That takes money. If your country's being invaded or your power's going out or you don't have food or you're in the developing world, you don't have time to have a Discord server.
Yeah.
So you get what I'm
See,
saying.
I would say you could stream in my Discord, but no one in it. It's just me and a thing.
I understand. Well, someday I will have even more devices than I currently do, and I'll stream in that Discord server too, and you'll have more people in there. Your Discord server will be very famous, just like all these other big ones. And in the meantime, go ahead.
So, no, so thank you for elaborating that. I'm part of what you're saying.
Yeah, and it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Unfortunately, it makes sense. So now you have to
it
think.
does make sense.
It does. But you know what's freaky is that number, $33,000. That's like less than what an average American makes, and you're telling me that makes them part of the top 1%? Absolutely. When you look at the populations of China and the populations of India and the populations of Indonesia and many of these other developing countries where people live on $2 or $3 a day, well, of course, $33,000 is going to be the top 1%.
That's like buying a brand new 24 plate for rep.
Oh, a Ford Raptor is far more expensive.
This cat is doing my head in.
That's okay. So we have some other friends who have joined us here. I don't know if you know who I am. I'm Rabbi Rothschild. Pleasure to meet you. I stream my life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for world peace. I don't want war anymore. I've been live streaming my life 24/7 for more than 3 years. And I want you to know, Omen, Sigma Misty, and Spectrum, I'm glad that you're here. We talk about positivity. We talk about life improvement. We talk about community improvement and really do our best to have a positive mentality in all aspects of society. I,
This man is our future. This man is our future.
well, perhaps we all are our future. I have more data than any person on the internet ever. It's essentially a time capsule for society. It goes back to the pandemic. We've seen the death of a king, I'm sorry, the death of a queen, the birth of AI, the coronation of a king, and everything in between. It's very exciting that I have the opportunity to be here with you and be able to connect in the ways that we do. We are creating a community of positivity. And if you guys ever have any questions or you need anything, know that I'm here to support you in all of your endeavors. Our friend Ginger Bong Man has the exact correct attitude that, hey, Rabbi, this seems like a really cool project. I'm going to check in with you once a day and just see how things are going, and we'll become best of friends over the course of many years. We'll grow up together. We'll learn each other very well. And I want our other friends in here, Omen and Sigma Misty and Spectrum, to know that I look forward to being your friend as well. And let me let you know this as well. You may not even know English. If you don't know English, that's okay. I have technology that can overcome all of that very quickly. So here, like last person to whom I was speaking was Turkish. This translates Turkish instantly, but it translates anything instantly. It's a universal translator. This type of technology, if given to people, especially in warring communities, could change the world.
Lütfen anında Türkçe'ye çevirin. Ancak herhangi bir anı çevirin. Bir teknoloji evrensel bir çevirmendir. İnsanlara, özellikle savaşta, mutlulukları verilirse dünyayı değiştirebilir.
It is. It's called a pocket talk. So I don't know, but some of these there's some anime here, so I'll just get another perhaps example. So we have Japanese. We'll try. I don't know Japanese. I don't know if anybody in here knows Japanese, but just know if you can hear this, just know that I care about you and I only want good things to happen to you, your friends, and family.
私は日本語がわかりません。ここに 人がいるかどうかもわかりません。でも、もしあなたがこれを聞いていたら、私があなたのことを聞くことを知っておいてください。そして私はあなたとあなたの友人や家族に良いことだけが起こることを願っているのです。
So I think this kind of technology could really change the world. Welcome, welcome. Shout out to Aharon. How are you, Aharon? Pleasure to have you here. So, with that, Ginger Blonde Man, we're gonna take a little bit of a break. I'm just gonna let my voice rest. We're gonna watch some documentary. Or not. I'm here, guys. You guys don't know who I am, but just one moment. I'm trying to pause this. Just one moment. Okay, you guys don't know who I am, but I'm Rabbi Rothschild. I stream my life 24/7, like you heard, and I'm here to be your friend. And if you want to be friends, great. If you don't want to be friends, you don't have to be. But just know I want positive things for you, and I'm glad that you're here.
And both Bar Kokhba and his rebellion from the sources. Here is a children's book. The translation is the history of Israel for children. The Bar Kokhba rebellion is very heroic here and rallying the Roman front. This describes the rebellion that took place from the year 132 to 135 of the Common Era. The leader, of course, is Bar Kokhba. In the Midrash, he is described as a mythic leader of phenomenal proportions. An extremely brutal and warrior, not unlike some of the pictures of David and also the Talmud says, for example, uncommon in the Talmud, that to test their bravery, Bar Kokhba would have all of his have a digit sliced off their hand. Totally in Jewish law, by the way, kids don't try this at home. But the rabbis complained, Bar Kokhba, what are you doing? How long will you mutilate the young men of Israel? He said, well, what else, how else am I going to test their bravery? And they suggested, have them uproot a living tree from the ground with their bare hands. Will that do? Yes, that will certainly test them. So that's how they were tested, as the Talmud says. They were tested for their strength and their bravery. I don't know how to take this on a literal sense, but when we see his writing based on the archaeological discoveries in the 1960s, we definitely see that he was a very determined and very insistent leader, often demanding retribution of his followers if they did not comply with his demands. He was known to many as a possible Messiah. And let's remember, in Jewish terms, a Messiah, Mashiach, is a human being, a political leader who will effect a military unification of the land of Israel, who will bring in all of the exiles, who will bring in the gathering of the exiles, and initiate a period of great peace and prosperity for Israel and the world. And many saw Bar Kokhba as that person, including famously Rabbi Akiva, who towards the end of his life supported Bar Kokhba as the Mashiach. He was contradicted by several of his colleagues. One of them famously said, Akiva, you have grass growing from your cheekbones. Bar Kokhba is the Messiah, meaning it's impossible and you will be dead. Bar Kokhba will never be the Messiah. But nevertheless, the notion of Bar Kokhba as Messiah certainly inspired many to follow him. Here is, by the way, one of the amazing finds that was uncovered by Dr. Yadin in the Dead Sea region. The very top right is Shimon Bar Kokhba, Nasi Israel. Shimon Bar Kokhba, president of Israel. Unfortunately, there's so much we don't know about the war. One of the most basic things we don't know about this war is why exactly did it start. Cassius Dio, the Roman historian, gives us an account of the war. Unfortunately, the only version of Cassius Dio's account has not survived antiquity in its original formulation, but rather as what they call an epitome. We say in English the epitome of something means something like exemplary, the best, and the ideal. But in classical terms, it really means an abbreviation. Oh, this is too big, too long to read. Give me like the clip notes, the short version of this. That's what we're looking for. And so we have an 11th century epitome by Johannes Kipinius that's shown here that gives us, unfortunately, just passing references to Bar Kokhba, and we don't know exactly what Cassius Dio wrote, but we're hopeful that this is correct. According to Cassius Dio, in this epitome, the reason for the revolt was that the Emperor Hadrian, who's shown here, decided to rebuild Jerusalem, but rename it after himself, Haile Capitolina, right? And to build on the site of the temple to God, instead a temple to the Latin god, the Roman god Jupiter. And this, according to Cassius Dio, inflamed the population of Jews and a rebellion. Now, according to Hadrian's own biographer, Spartianus, who wrote the Gita Hadriani, the life of Hadrian, the Roman Empire, had nothing to do with the rebuilding of the temple. It has to do with a ban on genital mutilation, something which the Romans had frequently issued, but it's uncertain what exactly it is talking about. For many, it was understood castration as well, but it's possible that the revolt was started because Jews thought it was going to be circumcision. In fact, perhaps it didn't, but later that was certainly exempted from the ban on genital mutilation. Others say no. The Midrash, for example, suggests that it had to do with an effort to rebuild the temple that was then thwarted by the Samaritans. Finally, Pausanias, who was a second century Roman geographer, followed by Eusebius and Jerome, who were church fathers who lived in subsequent centuries, said that it's possible not that the revolt was caused by persecution, i.e., these decrees, but that these decrees followed the revolt, meaning the general environment, whether it was the political oppression, the destruction of the state, the previous war, or whether it was the messianic ferment, that these things might have caused the revolt, and then later the Hadrianic persecutions, which were especially associated with the group of people called the Ten Martyrs of the State, the Asara, formed an important part of the Jewish liturgy, that those occurred not before the rebellion, but rather after the rebellion as a response. Not impossible. At any rate, these are the major theories currently floating regarding the origins of the war. We'll have to conduct further research and hopefully find some more archaeological discoveries that will give us some greater insight. For certain, however, the war was quite brutal, and it lasted for about 3 years. We know of Bar Kokhba's exploits, which appear to have been initially quite successful. Bar Kokhba and his rebels seized Jerusalem, apparently, and marked that event with the minting of many coins. Actually, not precisely the minting. What they did was they would take Roman coins, heat them up, and restamp them, which in itself, by the way, is actually treason. And they would restamp them with Jewish themes, and they would mark them with messages like, the freedom of Jerusalem, year one, year two, things like that. Here's one depiction of the Bar Kokhba coins. You can see that the top coins have the temple on them, on top of a Roman tetradrachm, a stela, and at the very top is a little star motif, which is emblematic of Bar Kokhba itself. At the bottom, you see traditional themes like a lyre, grapes, urn, and trumpets. But what's interesting is what you don't see, which are any representations of human beings or animals, which was very much against Jewish sensibilities in the second century. Another version that shows resurrection of Rabbi Akiva and the various depictions in the Talmudic sources, but also in the archaeological evidence, seems to have been leading a movement of observant Jews. They were striving to maintain the observances of the holidays, things like that, even when they were besieged and literally living in caves. We know that the war was quite brutal, that Hadrian suffered tremendously, and as we shall see, had to bring in significant reinforcements to put down this very successful rebellion, which took great advantage of the local terrain. Eusebius refers to the Jewish rebels being active in the of the mountain range. We know that Hadrian suffered not only because of the support he had to draw in Roman Empire, but also passing when he wrote to the Senate the report of what was happening in Judea, pointedly omitted the phrase and the only word then, which means I and my forces are well. I and the armed forces are doing fine, thank you. He took out that standard phrase, which Cassius writing in the second century was a very big statement to the Senate. Ultimately, however, the rebels did not hold out against the overwhelming might of the Romans, and they were reduced to hiding in caves. Some of them are shown here, largely undiscovered until the 20th century. Originally from Bedouin, as artifacts began to filter out into the black market, that's when Gael decided to investigate. And in the early 1960s, we found several cases amazing, amazing discoveries that we're going to look at in this lecture and a couple of others as well. For example, these urns, which are quite remarkable in themselves. But one of the things that tells us about Bar Kokhba is that they used to have like decorations of facial features that were intentionally defaced, as were all of the implements that had decorations of this nature in the case. In other words, these may have been made by Romans or Phoenicians or something like that, but the Bar Kokhba rebels, not wanting to transgress the commandment of graven images, specifically defaced them to remove them. In a sense of their religion, there are several other instances of this as well, such as, for example, the discovery of balls of unworked yarn that was dyed with what they believed was the Tefillah. Tefillah is a blue color, which may be a little bit distorted by age, thousand years, right? And photography, right? And this would have been used as a single thread fringed garments worn by the so-called what chemical analysis of this dye, however, and thread indicates that the Bar Kokhba rebels were apparently holding onto some forged chelet, which the Talmud says was a problem in the era because with the technology of the day, it was impossible to know whether this was the actual chelet made with the specific molecule that produced this dye, or whether it was made from a vegetable source, which would have rendered it unfit for the palate or the prayer shawl, but nevertheless was frequently circulated in the black market. Many more mysteries surrounding this, but nevertheless, you get the idea that the Bar Kokhba cared about Jewish rituals. Now, as the war went, Hadrian, seeing that he was having a difficult time, he summoned none other than Julius Caesar from Britain, an incredible general who had tremendous success putting down a difficult riot way on the other side of the empire. So he was specifically brought to Judea in order to maintain the order. Hadrian also summoned six legions, an estimated 50,000 troops when all was calculated. And that's an amazing number. It's impossible to imagine that Bar Kokhba had more than perhaps 10 or 15,000 troops at his disposal, and even that is definitely on the high end of the estimation. Nevertheless, the Roman casualties were described by a contemporary, Marcus Fronto, as being very similar large number, 580,000 casualties, over almost 1,000 and 60 outcomes. Now, it's possible that, especially in terms of the casualties, the numbers are hugely inflated. Even with the large numbers, we know that 6 legions were in the area. So certainly it would have been an absolutely horrific massacre, all told. The last stand was at Beitar, shown here. And as the last of the Bar Kokhba rebels were killed by the Romans, there was this particular event was actually enshrined in the liturgy. Grace after meals includes a blessing, which specifically is composed in memory of the martyrs of Mayhem. Like the Bar Kokhba, the residents of we have, for example, the scouting led by Vladimir Jabotinsky, shown here in the center of the group of scouts, was a very important movement that had a very important role in Israel and by extension to the party itself, people like Menachem Begin, Prime Minister of Israel. Thank you very much for watching. One of the most consequential questions in Jewish history is very basic. Now, you might think that this is a settled law, that there's no question about it, but in fact, when you look a little more deeply at Jewish history, there are several periods in history when it becomes a very important question. For the vast majority of Jewish history, particularly the last millennia, most Jews have regarded as someone who has a Jewish mother. That is matrilineal. The nominal identity of a person follows that status, regardless of affiliation with religion or self-identification. But that has not always been the universal case. What I'd like to do today is focus on this question as we introduce the question of women in Israel. Now, let us recall that this is certainly a controversial question as of the late 20th and early 21st century. And this is primarily because of a decision that was made by the Reform movement in 1983 that recognized patrilineal descent, more precisely both matrilineal and patrilineal descent. But in other words, this represented an acknowledgement by a major Jewish movement that as long as one ethnically Jewish, however you define that Jewish, then the child could also be Jewish. There's more to it than that. And perhaps one of the most important things to think about is, did this decision, initiate change, or was it simply a recognition of change that had already happened because intermarriage, especially in American history, was at such a high level that we already have the phenomenon of children who have like a Jewish father rather than Jewish mother and wish to identify with the Jewish community, and they find that they are shut out because the matrilineal principle has been the dominant one for the last 2,000 years. And it's resulted in a lot of really painful moments. For example, this article by Shoshana Tikva, a very difficult and personal issue. In this particular video, I mainly intend to go over the historical issue, and I will leave the philosophical and religious, and indeed sociological and psychological issues to people who are more expert. So the question that we really have is, when did the matrilineal status become effective, or when did it become the norm? We see when you read the Bible, it's very clear. First of all, there is a strong prohibition, very clearly worded, against intermarriage with Canaanites in particular, but one can easily generalize it refers to, intermarriage in general. At the same time, the important thing all apparently Jewish parents. How do you compare these things? By the way, of course, Joseph, Moses, Solomon how is this the case? So we're going to go into some of the major issues here, but I want to point out that perhaps the most significant study of this is by Shia J. Cohen, The Beginnings of Jewish, which goes through a lot of really important issues in the classical period, especially issues of conversion, issues of matrilineal and so on. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all of his conclusions, but there's no question by a masterful survey of the sources, and there's a lot of value in this. We're trying to square this conundrum. On the one hand, we have this long-standing practice of matrilineal descent, and on the other hand, we have these biblical examples of being contradicted. There are three logical ways to approach the challenge. The first is to say that, well, let's say the law of matrilineal descent, this concept, the principle, is not always described in the text. That, yeah, Moses married a Midianite, but the Midianite woman went through a conversion. And Joseph married, an Egyptian woman, but she went through a conversion. If that is the case, we have to wonder, well, why doesn't the text tell us? Why doesn't the Torah reveal that this is in fact what happened? Wouldn't we be prone to misunderstanding the text if it doesn't say something which actually happened? That's one possibility. Another logical possibility is that, yes, the law was always in effect. It always adhered to this matrilineal principle, but it was sometimes ignored. You have that sometimes where, as Rabbi Rothschild likes to say, never Judaism Jews, right? Jews do not necessarily behave in normative, acceptable ways. So perhaps, the examples we have in the Bible are, not in conformity with the way Jews are supposed to behave. Now that would be obviously an acceptable answer, except the fact that, figures, Moses, Solomon, others, people, and are really going to assert that they were behaving contrary to law, that's definitely problematic. It's also a smaller problem, which we won't go into right now, but the Midrash has a principle that even before the Torah was given, of that level in any way, certainly behave in conformity with the Torah. Like, for example, the laws of keeping kosher were not given until the Torah was given, but you still wouldn't have the patriarchs and matriarchs going out for non-kosher food, that kind of thing. So that's a smaller problem. Let's avoid that one. The third logical possibility is that the law wasn't always in effect. Maybe the law of matrilineal descent, or the principle of matrilineal descent, was introduced later in Jewish history, which would mean that the earlier biblical figures who followed apparently a patrilineal principle were not contravening the law. Again, there's that small midrashic objection, which is useful but not for us today. But if that is the case, that we think the law was not necessarily in effect when it changed. So that's the three possibilities. Let's look at them in turn. But let's start from the basic one. Let's say, when's the first unequivocal statement of this principle? So the first one is the Torah itself. And here's one classic passage. It's Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 7, verse 4. So verse 3 says, do not intermarry with them in the surrounding non-Jewish nations. Do not give your daughters to the sons, or take their daughters for you. And then in verse 4 it says, Yasir et mincha me'acharai, va'avdu Elohim achem, v'chara avatem achem, shmitcha mahem. Right? Now let's look at the translation. They will turn your children away from me to worship other gods. And the Lord's anger will break forth against you. He will promptly wipe you out. Right? Really strong word. The problem with this particular passage, normally Sepharia is amazing, but they're relying on translations that in many cases are already extant. And this translation is a little bit of a distortion. We look carefully at the English. It's not they, or in the Talmud, that plural really should be for he, right? The word in person, grandchild, is not even Jewish. That's the clearest biblical statement of matrilineal principle. And as you do it, really he
turn your children. Now, your children is also not in the plural. It should be in the singular masculine, or your son, which in this context would be your grandson. Wait, so let's understand this properly. It says, meaning your son-in-law. It can't be your daughter-in-law, because it would say for she, it would put it in the feminine. And by the way, in Hebrew, there is no neuter gender. Every single noun or pronoun has to be either male or female. Binary, there's no other choice. And it is masculine. So this means that if you have to imagine yourself about extensively, and even Paul, you have to understand that in some cases, in some ways, the New Testament, the Christian writings, are kind of like a historical commentary on Jewish society as well. So it's very useful to kind of like flesh out what's going on in the first century in some way. But anyway, all these three important figures, they seem unaware of the matrilineal principle. Book of Dr. Cohen's book is specific examples, but it's pretty clear that they're clueless about this. Give you one example, Josephus. He speaks about King Herod, Herod the Great, and he goes on and on about how Herod's own pedigree was questioned by the Jewish community. He's called the Judean, he's called the half-Jew, because his father came from the Judean people who had been forcibly converted prior to this era of the Maccabees, the era of the Hashmonaim, the John Hyrcanus. In other words, because his father descended from a people that had a questionable conversion, there are doubts about Herod's own Jewish identity. But no one seems to be bothered by the fact that his mother wasn't Jewish. His mother was an Arab woman. So what's going on? It's like totally, not relevant, their mother. So now there are ways you can approach it. You can say that Josephus is not necessarily the best, exemplar of rabbinic Judaism at all. And it could be that only the Pharisees were observing this kind of level of observance that became normative. What Dr. Cohen argues is that in reality, the whole institution of conversion had not really coalesced by the time, and that there was kind of like a different standard for women marrying Jewish men, that their marriage itself constituted the understanding of conversion in that era. Fascinating argument. Whereas men, if they wanted to convert, required a much more complex process, which involved, among other things, circumcision. So that's why when men would marry into Herod's family, there was a whole big deal about, they went through this. They had the circumcision and so on. But there's no discussion of when non-Jewish women are incorporated. For certain, however, by the time you get to the Mishnah, which is about the turn of the year 200, about the turn of the 3rd century, there's no question that rabbinic Judaism is absolutely down with the idea of the matrilineal principle, reaffirming what we saw in Rashi, the later. The idea is that matrilineal, Jews handle a tremendous degree of dissent. There's room for a lot of diverse opinion within the large tent of Jewish identity. But this particular question of whether or not a person is Jewish is one of those third rail type questions that tends to result in fissures. And when it remains unresolved, it has very dire consequences for the integrity of the larger Jewish population. But I leave that for people who are experts. I hope you found this short video useful and we can continue the discussion of different ancient Israel. Thank you for watching. over the course of the past few videos, we've had opportunity to occasionally talk about specific Jewish women as they appear in ancient Israel in both the biblical context and a larger archaeological context. But let's just take a step back and have kind of a macro look at the methodology of studying women in ancient Israel, the nature of sources, and some of the challenges that are associated with this extremely important topic. One of the ideas that's circulating right now, which I think is a very valuable project, is something called the Kranjek test, named after this person, Daniel Kranjek, also pronounced Kranjets. I actually have to contact her to find out which pronunciation they use, but in America they tolerate Kranjek. At any rate, she actually was trained as a historian, so it was a nice conversation. Her test, which gained a lot of popularity in the world, especially on what we call Twitter, is inspired by the so-called Bechdel test. The Bechdel test is something that has been used for modern film to sort of purity check the quality of the film from the perspective of a feminist analysis. That is, in order to pass the Bechdel test, a movie has to have two women, must also include at least one non-male identified text. It's a very valuable idea to try and expand simply the universe of our awareness when it comes to rabbinic theology and writings. And I would love very much to do this in history as well. We see that we're living in an era where this incredibly important aspect of the human condition, the experience of women in history, has been ignored for centuries, and it's so hard to find women's voices in medieval and in ancient sources. But it's something that we really want to resurrect. We want to try and recreate as much as possible what the experience of living was for fully half of the human population. We happen to live in a cultural moment where this is unusually suppressed as well. And for some of you will be following controversy regarding the decision of some Jewish media to publish things of women. I'm not going to go there for now. Perhaps we will return to it in a semester or two when we get to the 20th century. But I think it is important to point out that this is not at all a uniform practice. It's really on one particular spot on the spectrum. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, who we mentioned in another context before, was especially noted for insisting that in any children's book portrayals, such as this Shem handbook for Jewish children, if there is a male child portrait, there should always be a female child portrait as well. So this is something that has pushed back on all sectors of the Jewish population. And it's just another example of the Kranjek test kind of expressing itself culturally. When we come to our challenge, which is trying to understand the experience of women in ancient Israel, the difficulty is that the vast majority of our sources are by men, for men, and about men. This is especially true in the literary realm. If we look, for example, at classical rabbinic texts, we have the Mishnah, which on the one hand you say, great, look at this, it has a whole section called Nashim, which is all about women. That should be it, right? But not really, because it's describing how men relate to women, marriage, divorce, levirate marriage, and so on. So women are included in the canon, but at the same time they're kind of fenced off. Another way to look at it is in the temple courtyard, there was a section called Ezrat Nashim, the courtyard of women. That means that women were part of the overall functioning of the temple, but on the other hand, there was relegated space for them. By the way, we should also understand relegated space for all kinds of people who are not Kohanim and not Leviim and not involved in sacrifice, things like that. But the point holds true. They are mentioned, they're part of the story, but they're also relegated. Our idea is to try to understand their experience in the broader scope of Jewish history. When it comes to archaeological sources, archaeological sources, finds that you get at dates and so on, they are extremely limited in nature, much more so than literary sources, and they're incredibly difficult to interpret. As we saw, for example, with the Bar Kokhba case a while ago, I'm going to speak about them a little more, you find cosmetics in a cave. It's reasonable to assume that these cosmetics belong to a woman, but not necessarily. Ancient men wore gold, for example, kind of eye makeup. So, what can we really glean from women's history when a lot of the sources are anonymized like that? It's very difficult to interpret them. If you find a bowl, a serving bowl, one may assume perhaps that it was more likely that it belonged to a woman, or a woman was more likely to have handled it, but there's no guarantee on that either. So it's very difficult to actually, on a theoretical level, reconstruct women's experience of history in ancient Israel based on the sources we have. There are some really exciting materials, however, especially when you get to late antiquity. For example, we have the Rufina inscription, which comes from Smyrna in the 3rd century. And if you can make out some of the Greek alphabet there, it's basically a funerary inscription that describes the woman as an archisynagogus. That's right at the right side of the top line, going into the second line, says synagogue, leader of the synagogue. We actually have quite a few examples of women who are represented in this particular title. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean from the larger context that they were, like, say, the rabbi or even the president of the synagogue. It may mean something like major donor to the synagogue. But nevertheless, these kinds of descriptions give us just a glimpse. Perhaps exceptional women who were wealthier, more influential, but who definitely had significant roles, as we shall see, not so much in today's lecture, but as we move forward, highlight these in order to try and pass the project test as much as possible. Okay, let's just look at the biblical text. Now, one of the there are literally thousands in the biblical text, to be sure. In many cases, however, they are nameless or they are named in relationship to men. Like, for example, the wife of Noah, the children of Lot, daughters of Lot, Jephthah's daughter. We don't know their names from the biblical text, but they are named usually in some kind of relationship to men. Sometimes they're identified in terms of their character or skills, like the wise woman of Noah, or sometimes based on their place, like the witch of Endor. But there are literally hundreds, thousands of women in the Hebrew scriptures, and we don't know much about them in person. But there's some fascinating aspects when you include the oral tradition as well. Have a look at this picture here. Obviously, it's a piece of Persian art, but you wonder, like, that looks like a relatively familiar scene, right? It looks like Joseph running away from Aisha Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar, very famous scene, of course, in Genesis, where she's grabbing onto his cloak as he's trying to escape. And here's another aspect of the Jewish tradition is that although they may be nameless in the biblical tradition, the rabbinic tradition preserves oral tradition in which there are lots of names and lots of additional details. And one of the crucial things about studying the Torah in the Jewish sense is you need to have two fingers. You have to have one finger in the written text and one finger in the oral tradition to understand it as Jews have for hundreds of years. One easy way to do that is one finger in the text, one finger in Rashi, as we saw, for example, in the last lecture about actually writing that. So anyways, why am I bringing it to Persian art? Because in the Persian tradition, there's actually a name for Aisha Potiphar, Zuleika is her name. And now this is not the Jewish oral tradition, although maybe the Muslims are borrowing something from the Jewish oral tradition, who knows? But the same phenomenon exists, and there are many examples in the Bible of strong Jewish women. Typically, they're named when they are strong, and often they're quite strong in the sense of defying male command. For example, Sarah, who insists on the expulsion of Hagar, Abraham won't hesitate because he couldn't listen to her. Oral tradition, both saying because why she was doing it, because she is a greater prophet than he is. Rebecca, of course, she decides she knows better than her husband Isaac, the which of her two sons, Esau and Jacob, received the blessing. And in fact, she engineered Jacob's conception of her blessing rather than Esau.
You live in Penn.
Hannah, It's hard for me.
What's good in your neck of the woods?
What's up?
What's good in your neck of the woods?
Rod's going, bro.
How'd you find out about me, Smagel?
A friend of mine sent me this Discord invite link.
Dude, your friend is amazing. Was it Ginger Bung Man?
Was it who?
Oh, the other person in this server, Ginger Bung Man?
Are you Ginger Bong Man? No.
That's cool.
What's your user? Rabbi Bling Bling.
Oh, I know who that is. Shout out to Rabbi Bung. Well, we stream
Shout
our
out to
lives
Rabbi Bling Bling.
24/7, 365 for world peace. We don't want war anymore. I've been doing this live 24/7, 365 for more than 3 years. I have more data on the internet than any person in global history. This goes back to the pandemic. We've seen the death of a queen, the birth of AI, the coronation of a king, and everything in between. We talk about some things on this stream that aren't normally discussed in society. Things like antimatter, anti-gravity, de-extinction. We talk about things like dark matter, dark energy. We talk about alien disclosure. We talk about life extension technology, things like human growth hormones, stem cells, cryonics, cryogenics. We talk about nootropics and cold shock therapy. Smigo, has anybody ever told you that they don't think you're going to die?
No.
Well, there's a first for everything. I really mean this, and I wouldn't say this to you as sincerely as I do. I don't think you're going to die. You're like, okay, Rabbi, how am I not going to die? I'll take care of you. Okay, and how? We're going to get you to a point when you were born on this earth. Probably, if you're in the Western world, you're going to live at a life expectancy of like 80 years, maybe 76, right, something like that. Okay, but I want to get that further to 100, 120, and even to 150 and 200. And we're going to do that through stem cells and human growth hormone and all that other stuff. But eventually, your body's going to start breaking down, and you're going to say, Rabbi, it's time. That's when
Of course, is challenged by Eli Cohen, and Hannah stands her ground and says, "No, I'm praying to God, and she becomes a model of our prayer." We have female warriors like the woman who killed Sheva ben Bichri, also in the book of Samuel, or Yael, who plants a tent peg through the temple of Sisera. Fascinating examples. So, and you have to add to this, in the Bible, there are many negative portrayals of women as well, such as Jezebel and Athaliah. These are, complex examples of character that, they certainly are smaller in scope than the number of strong male characters, but nevertheless, depth and sophistication. It's hard to really analyze them from a historical perspective, as we saw in the previous lecture. Occasionally, tempting artifacts come up from archaeological finds, such as the seal that may have belonged to Jezebel. But for the most part, we are totally reliant on the biblical text. And so therefore, the kind of tools that we need to try and explore women's history tend to be more literary in nature than historical per se. Nevertheless, make use of the text, trying to understand everything we can about that. Let us discuss one sort of overarching important to understand the experience of women in ancient Israel, and that is that we have to transport ourselves from an early 20th century environment that are increasingly more tuned to adopt a more androgynous view of the world, to a more ancient view in which there was a very radically different experience of Judaism by men and women. One can certainly see echoes of it in the most traditional of Judaism, Orthodox and Orthodox, but this is something that would have been pervasive in ancient women. In the next lecture, we'll talk about some exceptional women, but when we want to look at women in general, one of the most important things to really bear in mind is the fact that men and women were not necessarily practicing the same religion. Maybe I can say it in a little bit better way. They were practicing the same religion, but there were two different tracks. The men men's track and a women's track. There's a lot to say about this in terms of religious studies, but in terms of kind of an anthropological approach, let's look at this one basic difference between men and women and how they would have approached Judaism. The Judaism is, of course, heavily dependent on the interpretation of the commandments. How exactly are Jews translate the biblical text as mediated by the oral tradition of the Pharisees into actual demands on daily life? So one of the ways to categorize the commandments, which, by the way, will be a major enterprise of the medieval thinkers, and we'll return to that, God willing, in 2 months, is to divide them on 4 different quadrants, shown here. So on the x-axis, we place commandments, that is, thou shalt not, things you're not supposed to do, and positive commandments, things that you are supposed to get up and do. And then on the y-axis, deposit those actions which are defined by category, but they are exempted from positive commandments defined by time. What does that mean? Exempt? In general, it means women may choose to do these commandments if they so wish, and they will receive reward for performing these commandments. But if they choose to, they are exempt from performing them. There's exceptions to this rule. For example, lighting candles Friday night, which is something which is specifically associated with women. That is a positive commandment and it is associated with time. And women are generally obligated to that. At least obligated before men are obligated. Another example would be drinking 4 cups of wine on the holiday of Passover, also a positive commandment defined by time. Women are obligated. The Talmud goes through a bunch of these exceptions and why they are exceptions. The general rule as such. Now, obviously, this has tremendous implications for lifestyle because one of the most disruptive elements of a day, that's putting the negative, positive, is prayer through the day. And clearly, women who are more likely to be overwhelmingly involved in the home, childcare, and things like that, the exemption from the positive commandments are defined by time, are extremely useful. You can't necessarily run off to school without a screaming toddler. And there's a lot more to say about why women were obligated not in another way, and whether the rabbinic formulations come after the sociological realities or the other way around. I will leave that with enthusiasm who are experts in religious studies and so on. But nevertheless, this is the schema of women's experience in the ancient world and for traditional, much of the medieval world and the modern world, the more orthodox communities. There are also, beyond this, experiences that women had that tend to be more biological in nature, like, for example, the regular mikvah, the immersion pool, and one of the most beautiful things that has been resurrected in the modern period is the composition of specific prayers that are associated with women's experience of the commandments, such as going to the mikvah, experiencing menopause, childbirth, things like that, which are largely, disappeared from the regular canon of text because they were primarily guarded by men. A lot more to say about this, but we'll have to move forward into the future. So these kinds of religious structural elements help define many of the traditional divisions between men and women and their experience of Judaism and the world as a whole. Women tend to be relegated to the private sphere of the home, but not at all exclusively. We have lots of interesting examples of women extending into the public sphere. Women tend to be involved in crafts such as the production of clothing, very, very time-consuming work, the production of the family, and so on. Again, no way appropriate but it's certainly reliable to say that it was more common than not. The next lecture lecture, I'd like to look at three exceptional women, um, two of which are exceptional because of their accomplishments, and a third who was exceptional because we simply happen to know a lot about her, and otherwise she may have been an absolute average woman, and will give us some sense of what it must have been like for life in their case in the first and second century. I hope you found this video useful, and thank you very much for watching. Okay, now that we've had a look at one specific issue, that of matrilineal descent, and then we looked a little bit at some of the sources, methods, challenges of studying Jewish women in antiquity, let's look at three exceptional examples, and we'll hope to learn from these examples some kind of contrast to the average women in general society. It's not a very precise way of doing things, but it's very difficult to work with the nature of the sources that we have before us today. Forward, some degree in the medieval period, but certainly when we get to the early modern and modern period, we'll be able to explore women's lives with much more dependence on their actual voices. But let's have a look at the three examples that will give us some sense of what it must have been like to be a woman in antiquity. So these three women were actually suggested in a book by Richard Freund, who was a very important archaeologist with some amazing work in the Cave of Letters and other places. This book, by the way, that's really quite fascinating, called The Bible, Modern Archaeology, and the Ancient Bible. And he suggests these characters. I also want to mention that he was someone who pioneered of colonoscopy tools in exploring hard to reach caves, right? Because his doctor suggested that's a great way to get into hard to reach places. And I have to mention that he has a striking resemblance to another famous archaeologist. Can't quite put my finger on who it might be, but there's a certain look. Oh my gosh, I wish I could go back to graduate school. I would study so many things, but one of them would probably be archaeology. At any rate, he suggests that we should look at the life of Gloria as an unusual woman of the second century of late antiquity. It's much harder to get back earlier in time as we discussed, but what do we know about Gloria? Well, first of all, she was mentioned frequently in the Talmud. She's the wife of a very important rabbi, Rabbi Meir. She comes from an important family. Her father was Hanani ben Teradion, one of the martyrs of the Hadrianic persecution that was related to the Bar Kokhba revolt. So that helps us see Gloria besides Rabbi Meir. Her father gives us events of her lifetime sometime in the second century. We know from the Talmudic account that her sister was actually taken off to captivity to Rome, although Dr. Freund has some interesting thoughts on that as well. Now, one of the fascinating things about her work is that she is so exceptional in that she is mentioned frequently in the Talmud as a sage. Let us understand that there are about 2,000 different Amoraim, or later rabbinic figures in the period of the Talmud, who actually have a named voice in this massive document. And there can't be more than 20 women who appear anywhere, and most of these women are unnamed, or they have a title like Matronita, something like that. Gloria stands out so much as being an incredibly important woman in the actual intellectual give and take of this massive document. She often corrects the sages who respect her learning, and she did it in a way that has kind of like a biting sense of humor. Like one particular example, when she is accosted by another rabbi who asks her for directions in a rather, polite manner, and she snaps back at him saying, Galilean fool, yeah, he comes from Galileo. Did you not read what it says? And she quotes another teaching: do not talk over much with women. You should have abbreviated your statement said which way to go, right? In other words, she's sort of throwing the teachings of the rabbis back at them. And there you get this sense that sometimes there is kind of like a proto-feminist critique of the things that she says. But that's a minor aspect of her teachings. Her life story and the kind of things that she talks about are often profound and very deep. She speaks to the nature of personal tragedy tragedy in life. We see with her father and her sister, and also the children of Rabbi Meir, who died of particular Sabbath boys, terrifying kinds of things, God forbid, um, and she's really a teacher of phenomenal depth, of halachic wisdom, of acerbic wit and perspicacity, an amazing woman. And she stands out primarily as kind of like the big exceptions to the rule of women who are silent, who are nameless or voiceless in the Talmud. Um, the end of her life is described in a bizarre passage that is only recorded 1,000 years after her life in the commentary of Rashi on the Tractate of Bodhizara. It doesn't occur anywhere else in rabbinic literature. And although it appears in a very authoritative commentary, that of Rashi, a great sage, nevertheless, so out of character with what we know about Rabbi Meir's life and what we know about Bruria's life. It describes her and is very ignoble. I will leave that up to the rabbinic scholars to debate the nature of that particular story. Nevertheless, Bruria stands out as one tremendous counterexample. The vast majority of women do not have the same kind of access to Torah learning that was so exemplary of her life and activity. So that's an exception in terms of the realm of scholarship, which of course would be extremely important for the development of Jewish society over the next millennia. Another very important figure now in terms of politics, the figure known as Baron. She was actually royalty in a literal sense. Her name was Julia Berenice. Her dates are somewhere around the year 26 to the year 85. She was the daughter of King Agrippa I and his wife Stavros. Now, you will recall that there were a few puppet kings in the Roman period in Judea. Some of them were very powerful, like Herod the Great, who was Berenice's great grandfather, if I calculated that correctly, and others were quite diminished in authority. King Agrippa I was one of the latter category. He happened to be a more sympathetic figure. He's quoted several times in the Talmud, usually in a very positive light. He ruled from the year 41 to 44 as a loyal Jewish princess, as she was married off primarily for purposes of lineage and connections, things like that, to one Marcus. Context: Nazarism is something. Nazarism is something that's recorded in the Bible, and of course is tractate, in which basically a person has some kind of like moving experience, and they want to like do repentance for it, they want to tshuva for it, and so they undertake some restrictions on their behavior, let their hair grow, refrain from alcohol, wine specifically, and then at the end of this period, which is usually 30 days, they come to Jerusalem, and then they offer a sacrifice. So she was there at that time when the revolt broke out. Interesting kind of sense of what kind of person she would be if she took on a Nazarite vow. And she stood up for the rebels. Went to Cassius, the procurator, who was very unsympathetic to the Jews, and she appeared before him barefoot, begged for mercy for them, but she was unable to stop either the Roman onslaught, and she was unable to control the covenant. For the that guy's been asked for a trip for the sages to stay somewhere safe and not participate in the revolt and not be killed, and this was granted. So Dr. Freund argued that maybe Berenice allowed this to happen.
987, 78.
Why people
Pretzels are making me thirsty.
marriage relationship. She's involved in private. She knows issues like the revolt. But this is clearly in contrast to the vast majority of that's no trace political record it is worthy to note that in her romantic relationship with art history as well, the relationship of Berenice and Titu has been celebrated in a number of literary, musical, and so on, including La Clemenza di Tito, the Mercy of Tito by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, a famous opera. Her role in relationships has been celebrated in Western civilization, far outside the Jewish awareness of her existence. Let us now turn to our final exceptional ritual. We looked at Luria as an example of exceptionality in that she was such a renowned scholar. Berenice, because of her high level political activity as a patron, such a queen. And now we have a woman who is exceptional in that we suddenly get a huge amount of detail about her personal life, although otherwise she would be unknown to us. I'm speaking about a woman named Babata. I'm only going to speak for a few minutes right now, but I would urge you to have a look at works on her by Dr. Hannah Cotton, by Dr. Freund, and others. I also have an hour-long lecture on Babata that goes into much more detail. She was one of the people hiding with the Bar Kokhba rebels in the caves in the Dead Sea region that we spoke about a couple of videos ago. And she may have died there. It's impossible to tell which one of the remains, female remains, would have been associated with her. There would have been women and children in these caves. But it's likely that she did die there because she left behind this pouch, which contained a scroll of nearly 20 documents that all her personal legal history. And by investigating these documents, which are written in a variety of languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, Nabatean, they all speak of her extensive legal battles. And in these legal battles, she saved these documents, also like marriage contracts, things like that. She saved these documents because clearly she was deeply involved in these battles that had to do with inheritance issues, some property that her parents left to her, and also property that one of her two husbands left to her. That second husband had a co-wife, right? They're in a polygamous relationship, not unheard of at that time. And she was disputing with her co-wife over orchard of date palms, things like that. And also she had children who the court had appointed the care of apotropai, or like custodial officers. She was seeking to get more control over her children and resting from the court. And so, this is not the place to go into the ins and outs of the specifics of her controversy, but the documents portray her as very much a woman in charge of her own affairs. It's not clear whether or not she was literate in these languages. She may have had scribes, involved in drawing them up and so on, but she clearly knew what they meant. She kept them all together in this pouch, and she treasured them like I have the family documents, our passports, and things like that, in a special little box. Like that. These are very valuable documents for her life and activity. And it gives us a sense of a Jewish woman in the second century who was not without means. She was probably upper middle class, dealing with property issues and so on, who took charge of her life. She was clearly an agent involved in that. We should not imagine, by the example, that the vast majority of women were passive and allowing a life to wash over them, being passed from man to man in various ways. This is a woman who was deeply involved in fighting for her rights and finding some success from that. The interesting question is, why was she there with the Bar rebels herself? It's possible that she feared the general destruction that was going on with the Romans. There's one particular figure who appears to have linked her to Bar Kokhba because he's also mentioned in terms of the Bar Kokhba chain of command, so perhaps it was a familiar relationship. We really don't know, but we get a sense of an average woman who has a very important detailed legal many of us today, and corrective the huge silence that we get from the sources in general. It's exceptional, not so much what their life, but the fact that we know a lot more about their life, many more of them, I'm sure, and analyze archives is great. Okay, I hope you found this video useful. We're definitely going to be incorporating more and more discussion of women into the lectures as we move forward in time. But the next series of lectures are going to deal with the diaspora in antiquity. Okay, thank you very much for watching. At this point, it makes sense to pause and sort of think a little bit about a major transition that happened in Jewish history that really colored the experience of Jews and the world. That is the diaspora. The term diaspora is Greek origin, and it means something like scattering, and it refers to the spreading out of Jews into the Mediterranean basin, Mesopotamia, and eventually throughout the world. Now, this has been the Jewish experience for the last 2,000 years. It's been dramatically altered with the establishment of the state of Israel in the middle of the 20th century. So, really, we're speaking about the biggest chunk of Jewish history in the post-biblical period has been all in diaspora, and Jews, Israel, throughout the long millennium diaspora. However, the majority of the Jewish population soon found themselves outside of the boundaries of Jerusalem, and suddenly experienced as Galut, as an exile. It's really pointing out, not in this particular series, but in one sentence, that the concept of exile on a theological level pertains even when Jews have returned to their land and have a state, meaning theologically Jews are still in exile, even if they're still living in Jerusalem today. There is a concept that until Messiah comes, there will be a diasporic or an exilic condition pertaining to Jewish existence. But at any rate, let us take some of our time and look at the diaspora in antiquity, both before the destruction of the temple and maybe a little bit after the destruction of the temple, before we move into the medieval period. Here's a map that gives you a sense of the diaspora after the Bar Kokhba rebellion. Recall that the first Roman Jewish war in the year 70 resulted in the destruction of the temple in that year, and ultimately the fall of Messiah. See, there was definitely dispersion of Jews within Israel itself, but the process of Jews settling throughout the Mediterranean basin and the Mesopotamia had begun centuries earlier. On this map, you see the kind of hatched lines that encircle the Mediterranean refer to the greatest extent of the Roman Empire, which would have been in the early 2nd century, and every dot that represents a city indicates that there was a Jewish population after the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 2nd century. Have a look at Israel closely here, and you can see that the hatching shows that there was a Jewish settlement along the coast, a little bit towards the northern Negev, heavily based in the Galilee to the north, and also a little bit in the Jordan Valley on both sides of the river as well. By the region around which is empty of the Bar Kokhba rebels and the destruction of Jewish businesses there. There's a lot of Jewish population, particularly to where the new center exists, and in fact banned from at this time as well. The Romans also changed the name of the land. The Latin term Palestina, which was intended to refer to the political enemies of the Jews in the land of Israel, the Philistines, Plishtim in Hebrew, and so renaming the region China was meant to try and, in terms of cartography, wipe it off the map. It's ironic, of course, that the term has been defined as a political term. It has always been a geographic term. We're also living in Mesopotamia, that is this region here, framed by the flow of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. We'll look at that in the next lecture. And then there's a certain amount of Jews in the Italian and in the Greek peninsulas and in Asia Minor as well. North Africa. Looked at one of those communities in the context of the Quitos Rebellion a while ago, and there are even Jews far west as the Iberian Peninsula and the south of France as well. So we're going to look at all of these, however briefly, in the next couple of lectures. But the main center of the Jewish diaspora at this period of time was undoubtedly Egypt, a very, very important place where Jews had been living for centuries. There's a long connection between Israel and Egypt after the Exodus. The Bible describes many relations between Egypt and Israel, quite often hostile and quite often not hostile. For example, King Solomon marries an Egyptian princess, and Isaiah refers to communities in Lower Egypt. Jeremiah spends some time there unwillingly, as it happens, after the assassination of Gedaliah, for whom there was a fast day after Rosh Hashanah every year since then. The Jews were primarily concentrated in the southern region of the earliest period. That is down at the bottom. You see the town Elephantine. Now, I always by the way, Elephantine. So, more carefully, I think it's supposed to be pronounced Elephantine. Maybe someone in the comments will correct me if I get that wrong. This is known as the Upper Nile, even though it is on the bottom of the map, as I mentioned to you earlier. The Nile, of course, flows to the north. It empties into the Mediterranean Sea, and so therefore upriver is south of the Upper Nile, and downriver is the Lower Nile, where you have, the cities of Cairo, Alexandria, and so on. So there is a very important military and Jewish military colony in Elephantine, and we're going to look at that in just a second. And it may go back, the roots of that settlement are somewhat under dispute, but it may go back as early as the 7th century before the Common Era, when Judah had relations with Egypt and some colony there. So let's look a little more carefully at that particular settlement. Here's a satellite view of the Nile River. You can see the green represents obviously the tremendous irrigation power of the Nile. And down at the very south, the little red part, there are some cataracts, which means that the river constricts and it loses depth, and ships moving toward the north have to find a way to unload their cargo or negotiate the rapids or put it on the land in a kind of portage situation. And so that's a really dangerous spot for any kind of transition. That's where robbers would lie in wait and so on. Hence, it makes sense to have some kind of military outpost there. Now, we know a little bit about this community because the records were preserved in Papyri and in Ostraca, right? Those bits of clay shards. We know that the Jews had a temple there, and it's interesting that they would have some kind of temple because, after all, the Bible is pretty clear about prohibiting any other temples outside of Jerusalem, but there were actually 3 other temples in the destruction of the Second Temple period. We have one in Shechem, which is Nablus in modern terminology, and in Samaria, that would be the Samaritan temple, of course, which regular Judahite Jews would not consider, of course, valid. The Arak el Amir in Jordan, and Yom Tophet, which would be in Egypt under Chonia. This is referred to as Chonia in the Talmud, Onias IV. So what there's going on in those temples is fascinating, but a little bit beyond our area of education today. We have in these records some interesting records of women, for example. Here's my chance to fill in the blocks and check off the Kranjak test. We have one very wealthy woman who owns several homes, things like that. Her name is Mitachia, which seems to be related to the word batach, meaning trust, to have faith in God. She was married 3 times, first to a Jewish soldier, and then apparently to two type of construction engineers or maybe architects. They're called builders. Maybe there were local quarries or something in the region. Not clear. Another fascinating archive refers to a man named Anania, who was a temple official, Jewish, who married an Egyptian slave named Tammuz. Tammuz is definitely not a Hebrew name because for the word she will die, right? That's probably not a good name for your daughter. So the fact that he's marrying an Egyptian slave is in itself bizarre, but you also see from the documents that in fact he wasn't even completely married to her in a Jewish sense, that it certainly does not follow any of the laws as described in the Talmud, because she was simultaneously owned by a different man, her master, someone named Meshulam, which is also Jewish. And he, in fact, owned their son, whose name was Pilti. If Ananya would default in the relationship and ask for a divorce, then Meshulam, the owner of the slave woman, to get the child. The whole thing is really unload their cargo or negotiate the rapids or put it on the land in a kind of cordage situation. So that's a spot for any kind of transition, and that's where robbers lie and so on. Hence, it makes sense to have some kind of military outpost there. Now, we know a little bit about this because the records were preserved in papyri and in ostraca, right? Those clay bits of clay shards. We know that the Jews had a temple there, and it's interesting that they would have some kind of temple because, after all, the Bible is pretty clear about uh, prohibiting any other temples outside of Jerusalem, but there were actually 3 other temples in the pre-destruction, the Second Temple period. We have one in Shechem, which is Nablus, modern terminology, and in Samaria. That would be the Samaritan temple, of course, which regular Judahite Jews would not consider valid. The Arak el Amir in Jordan, and Yom Topol, which would be in Egypt. Under what is going on in those temples is fascinating, but a little bit beyond area. Uh, We have in these records some interesting records of, for example, my chancellor blocked, check off the tangent. We have one very well like that. Yeah, which seems to be the word batach, meaning trust, have faith in God. She was married 3 times, first to a Jewish soldier, and then apparently to type of construction engineers or architects. They're called builders. Maybe there were local quarries or something in the region. Not clear. Another fascinating archive refers to a man named Anania, who was a temple official, Jewish, who married an Egyptian slave named Tammuz. Tammuz is definitely not a Hebrew name because for the word Tammuz, she will die, right? That's probably not a good name for your daughter. So the fact that he's marrying an Egyptian slave is in itself bizarre, but you also see from the documents that in fact he wasn't even completely married to her in a Jewish sense. That it was certainly does not follow any of the laws as described in the Talmud, because she was simultaneously owned by a different man, her master, someone named Shula, also and he, in fact, owned their son, whose name was Tosi. If Ananya were to default in the relationship and ask for a divorce, then Meshulam, the owner of the slave owner, gets the child. The whole thing is really bizarre. Also, so again, pretty much in contradiction to the thought, Talmud just started divorce on her own, which is something that the rabbinic law does not. Lots more to say about that. I'll come back to it in maybe at Jewish law. At any rate, fascinating details about families and Elephantine and the actual site of the temple itself. Another major center of Jewish settlement in Egypt and the early diaspora is Alexandria, which of course is today in the western part of the Nile Delta. You can see where it is here, right on the coast. The Jews of Alexandria go back centuries and centuries. In the 3rd century before the Common Era, Jews were involved in translating the Bible into Greek, making it available to the broader Mediterranean society. It had an incredibly influential role in promulgating the ideas of Judaism and was especially influential in the early church. And, there's a funny story about how the field gets written. According to the legend, 70 rabbis were brought in, and they were all put in 70 different rooms and given the Bible and told to translate it. And they all came out, compared what they had done, and they had all given the exact same translation. They all essentially agreed with each other. Rabbi Rothschild, the very important Rosh Hashiva in America, he likes to joke that call that a miracle? That's not a miracle. If you get 70 rabbis together, one room, and ask them to do anything, that's a miracle. By the 1st century, Jews were quite numerous in Alexandria, and they had one neighborhood, which was specifically the Jewish neighborhood, and a second one out of 5 neighborhoods that they were populating as well. But there was a significant amount of controversy with the Greek population, who recalled that Alexander the Great had swept through the entire region and had established all kinds of new norms and new cities in Alexandria, Alexander the son of Philoponus. And there are a lot of people who had privileges under the regime, under Ptolemy, but when the Romans came, they were not happy with the displacement that occurred as a result of management. Jews, on the other hand, saw it as potential for them to increase their status because Jews actually welcomed five of the fascinating description of major upheaval against the Jews near 30 which some of you call it actually the first Gazelle. This was reported by the philosopher Philo, very important thinker of the era, who approached the Bible primarily in the sense of Philo was important because Jews philosophical way to understand the Bible did not get that much traction he did not write any of the ideas were quite contrary to what the rabbis were talking about. Influential in the Christian tradition, and not so much on the Jewish. Anyway, this first up, and as a result of the tensions between the Greek and Jewish population in the city that were exacerbated when Agrippa the Alexandria, and mentioned as a large was decided to decide and Jews won the and the first one of them, which some would argue first
The thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it, you couldn't bend it, even a sledgehammer would buzz off it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was. It was not anything from this earth. I'm quite sure of. Because I was being in intelligence office, I was familiar with just about all the materials used in aircraft and in our air travel. This is nothing like that. It could not have been. Looked like it was weightless. Couldn't feel you had anything. I found one piece of metal, what looked like metal anyway. It was not flexible, but it was as thin as a fall in the back of cigarettes. It was that thin. And my boys told me, there's something unusual here. I tried to make a dent in this metal. You can't bend it. You can't take the mark on it. I took a sledgehammer and whammed it. I put it on the ground and whammed it. The sledgehammer bounced off of it. He told me not to say it. I'll have it from now on. And that's exactly what he did. Came out and he told the press there that there was nothing to grasp with him.
and it's more exiles will partially represent a small portion of the overall population. The majority of the population remains behind, impoverished, probably gender imbalance, because men may have greater numbers of women, but otherwise many Jews, majority, remain behind. Now here's a look at a map. The arrow is pointing to the region of Mesopotamia. That term, as I said before, represents the area of rivers. That's what Mesopotamos means, the rivers. And it's sometimes called simply Babylonia, although that's a term that obviously changed over time. Let's in here a passage from Jeremiah, in which he famously says, on the occasion of the 6th century exile to Babylonia, he says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, Jeremiah 29, verse 4, the God of Israel, unto all the captivity whom I have caused to be carried away captive from Jerusalem unto Babylon, build ye houses and dwell in them, plant gardens and eat the fruit of them. Take ye wives and be your sons and daughters, and take wives from your sons, and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear sons and daughters, and multiply ye there, and be not diminished. And seek the peace of the city, whether I have caused you to carry away captive. pray to the Lord for it, for in the peace thereof shall ye. This is kind of like the mission statement of the concept of exile in the Jewish tradition. The notion that this exile is galut, diaspora, to use the term, is something that is God ordained, and that Jews are to commit themselves to the lands in which they now live, to work to build it up with houses and vineyards and so on, to raise families there, and to pray for the welfare of the government, which of course is part of the standard ritual of God to this very day. But at the same time, we should understand that this represented a huge theological, spiritual challenge for Babylonian Jewry, because up until now, although the Jews worshipped an invisible God, their only conception of God was one in which God was associated with a particular place. Now they were in a foreign place. Were they somehow abandoned by their God? I know that much more modern thinking understands the concept of God as universal and not being connected to a specific place. But in the ancient period, it's possible to suggest that interested in their exile. And that's why Jeremiah's prophecy is famous throughout the generation. Now, what's going on in Babylonia? One of the most fascinating collections that we have so-called Rothschild archive. Now, this represents 730 clay tablets from the 5th century from the B'nai Rothschild, a family. It's not impossible that they are Jewish, but there's no real data to prove it one or the other. However, when the archaeologists go through the cuneiform tablets, there are lots and lots of names, right? It's a business archive with receipts and agreements and contracts and stuff like that. About 8% of the names mentioned in this massive archive are Jewish. And the way they tell is because they are so-called theophoric, meaning they invoke the name of the Jewish God right built into their own ways of referring to each other. My own children have theophoric names. It's very common. Like, let's say, I don't know, Jonathan, right? God-given. Right? They all like invoke the name of God in some kind of like active way. And so it's relatively easy. It's not foolproof. It's a pretty good sense of probably. So there are 8% of the names in this archive are Jewish, and they're located in 28 out of the 200 place names mentioned there. There's another collection, by the way, that refers to a place like a concentration of Jews called Al Yahud. Yahud, of course, would mean Jewish, and there's lots and lots of Jewish names in a separate collection as well, which was discovered quite some time after the Marasho archive was unnamed. And one thing I find really amazing about the Marasho archive is not only are the names theophoric, but Jews always use a patronymic. One is normally named with a given name, son or daughter of one's parent. In most circumstances, in Jewish practice, one is named after one's father, not after one's father, but one is named by one's father. So, for example, my Hebrew name is Hillel, my father's name is Yaakov, so I would be Hillel ben Yaakov, right? Hillel, the son of Yaakov. In almost all usages, you would rely on your father's name, but under certain circumstances, you would refer to your mother's name. For these things, I'm not going to delay us today. But what's really fascinating is if you look at the individual's name and their patronymic, and you see is there a change in the theophoric nature, you see that there's a real scene that something happened around the year 480 before the Common Era, in which all of a sudden these Jews have regular Babylonian names start giving their children super names as if they have suddenly discovered religion and they are much more intent on making sure that their children identify as Jews. Interesting. And in fact, that continues for several generations. But what would happen if all of a sudden you had all of these Jews that had like really secular names, like let's say, I don't know, Chad or Thomas or something is really not Christopher, right? Really not especially Jewish names. And all of a sudden their kids get names like Eliezer, Kana Rivka, and Sarala. What happened? That around the year 480, we don't know, there's a real Shuva movement, and they start giving their children much more Jewish names, and their grandchildren get Jewish names, and so on for quite some time. I just think it's cool. But let's go on. What did the Jews do? So the Rothschild archive, because it's primarily business and receipts and things like that, doesn't give a lot of detail about the nature of their lives, but it does say a lot about what kind of occupations they were involved in. It appears that there's a strong contingent of Jews who were active in the military. It's fascinating that the diaspora condition wouldn't necessarily be that first, that Egypt, but also Babylonia. Jews, of course, involved in animal husbandry, shepherding. Well, that sounds like a traditional Jewish pursuit, right? With David and Moses and so on. Jews are involved in buying and selling real estate. They're involved in government service, like they're operating on behalf of the government or so on. And we even have a significant population of Jews who are actually enslaved. There is a Jewish poor. It's not, one can't imagine that the vast majority of Jews are sort of like upper middle class. No, rather they are more middle class and lower in this archive. So much stuff to talk about. I wish we had more time. So let us just conclude a little bit by thinking about the political organization of the Jews in Babylonia, because this would, unlike Egypt, ultimately become the next great center of Jewish culture. That's what we're going to be exploring in just a few minutes. There's slow and steady growth of communities after Bar Kokhba. They move from Israel and they make their way to Mesopotamia, and this increases the population. There will be a significant amount of travel going back and forth between the major centers of Jews in Israel and in the Babylonian region. There are the so-called Nechute, which refer to rabbis who leave Jerusalem to go to Babylonia and teach the rabbis in Babylonia what they're saying in Jerusalem, and sometimes they go back and forth many times. So there is an increasingly large population there. There's a significant cultural impact as well, because this is a process that started hundreds of years earlier. Aramaic, as the stage language of the region, becomes the literary lingua franca for much of the Eastern Mediterranean, and of course it will be the language of the Talmud as well. Aramaic is, by the way, the Jews write it with Hebrew letters. Other peoples write it with different letters. And it's a Semitic language. It's not too far away from Hebrew in its grammar and structure, and even most of its vocabulary. It's probably sort of like French and Italian, or French and Spanish are close to each other, as Hebrew is Aramaic. We'll come back to that when we talk more about Babylonia. The organization of the Jews in Babylonia was quite sophisticated. They had something called Reish Galuta, or in English, the exilarch, the head of the exile. And again, I want to postpone a major discussion of this until a little later on in this next semester, but this is basically a figure recognized by the Parthian Empire as the head of all Jews in the region, and respected by the Jews, although sometimes in conflict with their leadership, in particular as the academies begin to grow. They'll really only take off in the 3rd century, but the various great academies of study, which will ultimately produce the Talmud, often get into conflict with the Reish Galuta. Nevertheless, just like we saw with the prayer for the government, there's also a prayer for the Reish Galuta that is every Sabbath service in Aramaic in contemporary synagogues as well. But you shouldn't think that it's all sort of organized and working together effectively. We have some fascinating stories. A lot of details of 2 brothers from the famous city of Neharda Archelaus and Asinaeus, who decided to just, go off on their own and create, for about 15 years, their own kind of like robber state, kind of like a warlord. Jewish guys maintained kind of like regional independence from the Parthian army, Parthian Empire, until finally the Parthians took care of it and destroyed the robber state. Fascinating, swashbuckling guys. More to say, Mesopotamia. One more short lecture. Let's say a little bit about the rest of the Mediterranean and the ancient diaspora. There's so much to say about all of this, but I just want to try and keep my remarks very brief because we will be returning to this in future lectures. So here's our map that shows us the extent of the Roman Empire and the kind of hatch lines. And as you can see, every single dot represents a city where there is a significant population. The region we should look at right now is moving from left to right, Italian peninsula that's shaped like a boot. And I said that in a Canadian way. And then there is the peninsula next to it. We'll also look a little bit at the Eastern Mediterranean as well, which is like Turkey and so on. The first suggestion of Jewish presence in Greece dates all the way back from the 4th century. And then, of course, after Alexander, there's much more of a presence building in the region. In Rome, we have a very significant population developing, especially so when Caesar in the 1st century before the Common Era claims Judaism a religio licita, which means a legitimate religion, which means it's protected and it has to be respected, and there are certain things that Jews do that they are allowed to do and continue doing because of Roman protection, such as very difficult transportation of the half shekel tax for the maintenance of the temple in Jerusalem. This was a practice which was continued throughout the period of antiquity, and the Romans actually protected it. The few times when transporting money was interrupted by official authorities was heavily criticized and represents definitely an exception to the rule because people respected, especially old religions like Jews were also granted military exemptions from conscription when they were observant. For example, the whole kosher food, Sabbath makes it very difficult. In many cases, the Romans were willing to overlook demands on conscripts from Jewish communities. So there's generally Jews did not so bad in the Roman Empire before the events of the Great Revolt. That's when it got really bad, and of course it went downhill from there. At the same time, while Jews are generally gaining a lot of traction socially and legally coming up to the 1st century, there is a growing social movement as well. We really see in a lot of early Greek and Roman writers. There is a basic misunderstanding of what Judaism is all about. There is a concern that Jews are somehow that they hate other people. Why? Because, for example, you can't belong to the religion unless you convert, which is like a strange idea. Really? I can't just like be a Jew because I sort of like Jewish things. No, you've got to go through conversion. That means exactly the circumcision. Jews wouldn't eat non-Jewish food, so you had to keep kosher. There was a lot of Jewish practice that was definitely misunderstood, like, for example, this total fanatic ban on any kind of civil religion, like any kind of worship of idols, like that. The Jews would get really upset about that, and Greek Romans were saying, like, what is the problem? It's so basic. I've often compared this to the example of not standing when the national anthem is played at a football game or something like that, which Americans would consider very. By the way, I used this example long before it became the emblem of the social justice movement, Black Lives Matter, and so on. But the fact that it has been used to take a knee at a football game is considered offensive. If they later, this is actually described in the Talmud, practice that, and a year later, this is actually described in the Talmud, practice that I do not believe Jews practice anywhere in the world today, but in the ancient period it was common. On the York side, on the anniversary of the death, they would go and they would exhume the bones, now denuded of all flesh, and there would be a ceremonial bringing of the bones to a family crypt. And so they would enter the catacombs and put them on a shelf next to the ancestors, as by modern sensibilities. I've never seen that. And they categorized it like this really charming palm tree on one wall, and painted a really important place for us. Antioch is one of the most significant of the centers here, and we see that once again the role of Jews in the military is quite significant. You have military formations in this region under Antiochus I and Antiochus III. Those are prior, of course, to Antiochus IV, that is associated with the Hanukkah rebellion, including 2,000 Jewish families who were military families transferred from Babylonia to this region. Really unusual to see that, I think. There's a strong Jewish community in Antioch in particular, but they have the same kind of regional tensions with Greek there as we saw in Alexandria. Throughout the region, there are the presence of synagogues on the western part of the and we speak a lot more about the heartland Sephardic Jews, not yet. Up until this point, Jews don't really recognize kind of like differences in cultural orientation. They refer to each other with geographic locations like Babylonian.
I got her. I got her. Oh, you poor thing. You poor thing. Shout out to Nikki, too, you poor girl. Oh, she's got to just fucking hate. Nikki, dude. I love Nikki, dude. She is amazing.
And then a new word, salo, un, uno, mens, quattro, dia, uno, dea, which translates as probably something like a girl's name begins with the letters N-I-A. Julia, something like that. Daughter of Solomon, age 1 year, 4 months, and a day. That the Roman numeral 4 is dashed rather than the I, which also is a testament to antiquity. Finally, she's as a Jewish girl. She is the first of Jewish government. Wow. More the next lecture that is the mark what the Jewish history, how that differs from the medieval period right after that. Thank you very much for watching. Hello and welcome to another in the Jewish History Lab series. Today's class begins with a rhetorical question. How did the Jewish people survive antiquity? I say rhetorical because don't get excited. I really don't think I'm going to give you a complete answer by the end of this class. My goal is to try and recap the period of antiquity, which we have spent the last 15 odd weeks looking at in detail, and kind of provide a moment to breathe, to step back, to reflect on what we've covered, because it's going to change dramatically in the next 15-week semester when we go into the medieval period. So again, I'm not going to really answer how did the Jewish people survive antiquity. I certainly have a few thoughts on this, and I'll share some of them in the next video. But for the time being, consider this just a moment to reflect on what we've covered and take a deep breath, and then we're going to go into the next adventure, which is medieval history. So here's a beautiful photograph from Samarkand. It's actually an antique photograph from the beginning of the 20th century, and colorized the life, Judean, so on. And I tend to sort of align them all and that here's the next event, of course, in the Bible is the Exodus, which occurs sometime around the year 1300 before the Common Era, resulting in a settlement in the land of Israel. And this is where we begin to slowly get more and more archaeological evidence